I know this is a bit of a controversial subject, and an opinion piece on my end, but let me make my case. When it comes down to the nitty-gritty of what a battleship does, aka do naval combat, Warspite is unmatched. Now, I'm probably going to have some upset people down in the comments talking about their favorite battleship, and why it's the best, wereboos, weebs, and my crazy fellow Americans. You're entitled to your own opinions, but I am as well. I'm going to give you an overview of Warspite's greatest hits, and you can tell me down in the comments what you think. With that, let's kick things off with a bit of an introduction to the grand old lady. Warspite was a super-dreadnought of the 1912 estimates, as the Admiralty looked to build a new squadron of fast and powerfully armed battleships. This new class, the Queen Elizabeth class, came in at around 32,500 tons, a top speed of around 24 knots, a main belt of 13 inches, and powerfully armed with 8 15-inch 42 caliber guns and twin turrets. Warspite had 4 sisters, Queen Elizabeth, Valiant, Barham, and Malaya. Warspite was completed in April 1915 and didn't get up to much until the Battle of Jutland in 1916, where she and her sisters, minus Queen Elizabeth, were attached to Admiral David Beatty's battlecruiser squadrons because Beatty desperately wanted these fast battleships, and the 3rd Battlecruiser Squadron was off at Scapa Flow doing gunnery practice. In this video, we're going to be going over the highlights, and at Jutland, this occurs as the run to the north comes to a close, as Warspite and the 5th Battle Squadron, along with the battlecruisers, join up with the Grand Fleet. Warspite was hit in her port wing engine room, which had buckled the after bulkhead of the center engine room on which the steering gear was secured, meaning that Warspite was circling dangerously close to the German line, some 9,500 to 15,500 yards away from Kaiserin, Friedrich der Grosse, König, Helgoland, Ostfriesland, Thuringen, Nassau, and Oldenburg, and they all blasted away at Warspite at various times with both their main guns and secondary armaments. The constant pounding of the German guns caused casualties and damage to the battleship. Warspite ended up doing 2 full circles, and then did an S which prevented another circuit, but threatened to take her back towards the Germans. But her engines were stopped, and after a time, Warspite's ship's company regained control over the ship. Fortunately for Warspite, the Grand Fleet forced the Germans to break contact after a time. Some of the worst damage to Warspite was her rangefinder and transmission stations, which were non-functional, and only 1 turret could fire. Because of this and other issues, she was stopped for 10 minutes so the crew could make repairs. Warspite was able to slip away, and not having encountered any U-boats, she returned to the Firth of Forth with great fanfare, where Naval Nursing Sister Mary Clark writes, "We were all up on deck after dinner watching and waiting, when we saw through the mist and rain 2 destroyers come under the Forth Bridge, and following them very slowly, but still in a very stately manner, the first battle-scarred heroine, HMS Warspite. A battle-scarred heroine indeed, having received 13 hits from German big guns. Although the damage seemed severe, there was no vital impairment to her fighting efficiency. A truly remarkable achievement, a testimony to her armament and build quality. Warspite circling at Jutland is part of what earned her the nickname the Grand Old Lady, and having completed 2 full circles in front of the German High Seas Fleet and not exploding, something that can't be said about other ships under Admiral Beatty's command. Yeah, I know they're battle cruisers, but still. Anyway, that circling is what the kids might call aura farming. But something interesting is this quote from R.A. Burt's British Battleships of World War I. Caused difficulties in the steering compartment and the rudder became jammed. This caused the ship to turn in a large circle, and at one point, she was steaming straight towards the enemy battle line and was fired on and hit many times by heavy shells. This phase of the action is referred to as the windy corner. At the critical point, she was as close as 12,000 yards to the enemy, and it was reported that her fire at the time was excellent. She was forced to leave the line and make her way back to Rosyth. An interesting bit of damage that continued to affect Warspite afterwards, and it became a unique little quirk that stuck with Warspite throughout her whole career, even after her significant upgrades and refits. Skipping over all of her refits and interwar service because that's boring and not what this video's about, we're talking about action here, people. Although if you do want that video, let me know down below. Anyway, Warspite was in the Mediterranean as war broke out in September of 1939, and she was recalled to the home fleet following the sinking of HMS Royal Oak. After returning to the home fleet, Warspite was tasked to escort a convoy carrying fuel from Nova Scotia, Canada, to the United Kingdom, but she was diverted to go assist in catching the German capital ships Gneisenau and Scharnhorst, after they had sunk an armed merchant cruiser, but Warspite failed to make contact with the German ships. In April of 1940, Warspite was going to rejoin the Mediterranean fleet, but the Germans began to invade Norway and Denmark, so Warspite was sent back to the home fleet and diverted to Narvik in Norway. On the 13th, Warspite led a force of 9 destroyers and 3 minesweepers into Oftafjord to destroy 8 German destroyers that were in the port of Narvik. Warspite's swordfish was sent up to spot targets for Warspite, and yes, it really was a swordfish float plane, I promise. While in the process, the swordfish sunk a German U-boat, but also continued its mission to spot and did so with great precision. In the following Second Battle of Narvik, Warspite and her destroyer escorts began to wreak havoc on the German forces, including the 8 destroyers. I know we just started talking about the battle, but I really want you to picture this. Warspite, a battleship, is entering into enclosed waters to fight torpedo-armed destroyers and U-boats, with not a lot of room to maneuver. I mean, granted, she had some serious backup, including her destroyer escorts and aircraft overhead. Still, that took some serious huevos. In the end, after dodging torpedoes and blasting away at German destroyers, including the destroyer Erschkolna, who received 2 full broadsides of Warspite's 15-inch guns and 4 6-inch salvos, and in the process, ripping apart the destroyer. Having helped to destroy all 8 German destroyers engaged in the battle, and German shore fortifications, and of course her swordfish destroying that U-boat, it was a pretty good showing for Warspite. Next, Warspite arrived in Alexandria in Egypt before Italy joined the war on the Axis side on June 10, 1940. Admiral Andrew Cunningham, who was in command of the Mediterranean Fleet, ordered it out on July 7th to assist convoys meant to reinforce the island of Malta. At the same time, the Italian Regia Marina was escorting their own convoy to Libya. Cunningham wanted to draw the Italian fleet into an engagement. This battle became the Battle of Calabria. On the 9th, the battle began with the cruiser engagement between the outgunned British cruisers and the Italian cruisers, which wasn't looking great for the British forces. Cunningham, a man who didn't stray away from battle, took Warspite ahead to help assist the ailing cruiser force. Now, the reason why Warspite and the other battleships were so far behind was the fact that the other battleships of Cunningham's fleet couldn't keep up with Warspite. As you see, her sister Malaya and the Royal Sovereign didn't get any fancy pants extensive refits like Warspite did during the interwar, and their machinery, to use a technical term, was poo-poo. So Cunningham ordered Warspite ahead to assist. To which the Italian cruisers, upon spotting Warspite, created a smokescreen and turned. As the smoke cleared, 2 Italian battleships appeared, the Giulio Cesare and the Conte de Cavour. Obviously, the odds in a numerical standpoint weren't in Warspite's favor, but Italian gunnery, especially during this battle, wasn't the best. Granted, they were getting somewhat close to Warspite, never hitting her, unless you're that one Italian guy in my comments who insists she was hit, but on top of that, Warspite had bigger guns, so she engaged at long range, and I mean really long range, like 26,000 yards long. As I said before, Italian gunnery wasn't perfect, but they were getting close, and Warspite altered course about 20 degrees to port and increased speed and temporarily ceased fire. But before Warspite ceased fire, her last salvo struck the Italian flagship, Giulio Cesare, at 26,000 yards, or for the rest of the world, nearly 24 kilometers. One of the longest range hits in history. Not knowing the damage to his flagship, the Italian admiral disengaged, and the battle ended shortly after. Still, Warspite having one of the longest range shots in history is extremely impressive, and I'd argue out of the longest range hits in history, it's the most impressive. I mean, I've talked about Scharnhorst hit Unglorious that occurred in June 1940 at over 26,000 yards, but it was a carrier with 2 escorting destroyers and no aircraft in the air. Basically target practice, and the rest you look up just aren't as impressive in my humble opinion. Like, congrats USS Massachusetts, you hit a French destroyer at 28,000 yards, cool. Even though it's disputed. Another aura farming moment, let me know Gen Alpha kids if I'm using that right, was at the Battle of Cape Matapan when the Mediterranean fleet, including Warspite and her sisters Valiant and Barham and their escorts, blew 3 Italian heavy cruisers out of the water in March 1941. Essentially, the cruiser Polo was crippled from a British torpedo from earlier in the battle, and the other 2 cruisers Zara and Fiume were detached to go help her. The Mediterranean fleet came upon them, and to take from dark seas the Battle of Cape Matapan, it gives a better description than I ever could. The next few minutes were decisive. The CNC altered course to starboard, bringing the fleet again into a single line ahead. Almost at the same time, Greyhound, which was then drawing ahead, opened up her searchlight. Its beam fell right across the water, most valuably illuminating a cruiser without revealing the position of our battleships. The Formidable, being obviously of no value in a gun action, was hauled out of line to starboard. The Warspite's turrets opened fire. A salvo of 15-inch shells crashed into the Fiume. Her after turret was blown overboard. She listed heavily to starboard and burst into a sea of flame. She was driven out of line and seems to have sunk or blown up 30 minutes later. Just before the enemy cruisers were sighted, the Barham in the rear of the line had sighted the Pola on the port quarter, making identification signals, and had trained her turrets onto her. When the Greyhound searchlight shone out, the Barham trained forward at once, opening fire on the leading ship. A brilliant orange flash shot up under the bridge, and bursts were all along the length of the ship, which turned to starboard and made off to the westward, making smoke. The Barham then shifted fire to Zara. The latter had been heavily hit, and a big explosion forward hurled one of her turrets overboard. The action lasted barely 5 minutes, shell after shell crashing into Italian ships, which were caught unprepared with their guns fore and aft. Warspite, Valiant, and Barham closed in and utterly destroyed Fiume and Zara at point-blank range, and destroyed Pola after the crew was taken off. After that, Warspite was in Crete, and then all the way in the Eastern Fleet, but that's not what we're interested in. Remember, only the highlights, folks. So, the Grand Old Lady was assisting in the invasion of mainland Italy in September 1943, providing bombardment support for the Fifth Army near Salerno on the 16th, when after a shoot she was attacked by German aircraft at 2:25 p.m. 3 bombs were spotted 6,000 to 8,000 yards out on the port beam. When the bombs and parent bombers were directly overhead, the bombs turned and dived at a great speed towards the ship. One hit Warspite, and after penetrating various decks, burst in the reserve feed tank below the number 4 boiler room. The other 2 were near misses on the starboard side, one abreast the bulge amidships, causing considerable damage, and the other causing little damage. Nevertheless, Warspite had just become the latest victim of the new German-guided bomb FX-1400. Warspite was in a serious situation as numbers 2, 3, 4, and 6 boiler rooms flooded almost immediately, and number 5 shortly after, meaning that she could not make steam and in the process lost the ability to steer. Because of this, she drifted into an unswept area. Her rear 15-inch turrets were also knocked out as well. All was not lost though, and with some counter-flooding, repairs were carried out by the crew, pumping, and with the help of United States salvage tugs, Warspite was eventually able to make it to Malta. The bomb hit near misses, although not destroying the Grand Old Lady, did seriously damage her and would limit her abilities for the remainder of her service. So yeah, Warspite had some serious damage from those German-guided bombs. But unlike the much newer Italian battleship Roma, whom was struck by the device and exploded, sinking shortly after, it looks pretty good for the Grand Old Lady. I know it's a bit boring, but I do want to go over the damage so you all can get an idea of what I'm talking about. Taking from R.A. Burt in his book, British Battleships 1919 to 1945, the bomb that hit the ship had approached at 20 degrees to the vertical and 15 degrees to the centerline plane. It struck the boat deck, passed through the port hangar, wardroom, galley, stores after mess deck, kit locker flat, and number 4 boiler room before bursting in a double bottom reserve feed tank. The hole in the boat deck was roughly 5 feet 6 inches square, and centerlined about 11 feet from the centerline to port, extending from 128 to 130 stations. The forecastle, upper and main decks were holed on the port side, stations to 126 to 128, 18 feet to 19 feet from the centerline respectively. The middle deck was holed. The outer deck was holed over A, B, and C strakes. The port side between 123 and 133 stations, the aperture being 20 feet by 7 to 14 feet wide. The inner bottom was blown upward over the same areas. The main transverse bulkhead, 100 to 154, both leaked. The main transverse bulkhead, 136, was holed. Other bulkheads were badly damaged in the area of the blast. The near miss hit the water close to the ship's side and burst near the bottom of the bulge at station 140, starboard side. The bulge plating was ruptured and bulged between 111 and 159 stations. Splits and seams were evident. The outer and inner battery platform was corrugated over the area of the number 5 boiler room, and both were holed. The bilge had been fractured. The compartments on the middle deck from 118 to 154 stations were flooded. As you could probably tell, Warspite needed repairs, serious ones, but she was already earmarked for bombardment support for the invasion of Europe, and so she got temporary ones. Age and injuries of war were catching up with the Warspite. She set sail to take part in the D-Day invasion with her X-turret permanently out of action, and with a huge concrete caisson molded over the large hole in her hull, made by the glider bomb explosion. Though the crew of the Royal Navy's battleships did not realize it quite yet, the era of the battleship was drawing to a close, and with that, Warspite was basically a big monitor. Warspite departed Greenock on June 2nd, with a force including Ramillies and the monitor Roberts joining the Eastern Task Force for D-Day. On June 6, 1944, she fired the first shots of the invasion, targeting German positions near Le Havre to support the Sword Beach landings. Over the next 2 days, she conducted intense bombardment missions, firing hundreds of shells at troop concentrations, headquarters, and gun batteries, often without spotting. After expending significant ammunition and wearing out her guns, she briefly returned to Portsmouth to resupply before being redirected to support American forces, where she delivered highly effective fire and earned praise from U.S. commanders. On June 13th, while sailing to Rosyth for repairs, Warspite struck an acoustic mine off Harwich. The explosion caused severe damage, including loss of power, flooding, and sieved shafts, forcing her to proceed at reduced speed using only starboard propulsion. Extensive repairs were carried out at Rosyth, including work on damaged shafts and structural components, though limitations prevented full restoration. After about 2 months, her guns were replaced and partial propulsion restored, reducing her top speed. By late August, Warspite returned to service, continuing bombardment duties alongside monitors like Roberts and Airbus. But our big monitor's career was coming to a close, and she was in poor condition in 1945 and didn't do much to close out the war, going out with a whimper in her service and not a bang. But as we know, the grand old lady always has a few tricks up her sleeve. By July 31st, 1946, when she was placed on the disposal list, her guns and anything else worth saving were taken off. During this time frame, there were calls for her to be preserved as a museum ship. Those calls fell on deaf ears as the Royal Navy continued with the scrapping process in Portsmouth. Shocker, the Royal Navy not doing the right thing. On the 12th of March 1947, Warspite was towed again to Spithead, and the following month 2 tugs arrived. Their job was to tow her to the mouth of the River Clyde, where Metal Industries would scrap her. However, on the 20th, while Warspite was near Land's End, a violent storm kicked up in the English Channel, and the waters were so rough that Warspite slipped her tow with one of the tugs. Warspite dug her bow stubbornly into the sea and began to take on water. Efforts continued throughout the night to control the unruly battleship in rough seas, but by the following morning it was clear they weren't going to get any further while the storm lasted. Warspite's bid for freedom, as some saw it, was national news. A Daily Telegraph journalist wrote, "I flew over the Warspite and her escort the last night as they crept slowly along the channel through heavy weather within sight of the shore 20 miles west of the Lizard. The tugs were straining at the tow ropes fore and aft, pulling almost at right angles to starboard, with the ship's bows to the coast. Their position hardly changed as we circled, and the tugs appeared to be doing little more than hold on to the great battleship in heavy seas. Both tugs were pitching so steeply that at times their screws were out of the water." While the Chronicle's reporter wrote, "Experts who, from the shore, watched her lurching and pounding heavily among the distant breakers said that the bottom must have been torn out of her. A fresh line was put across the Warspite by one of the tugs, and the battleship was towed into Mounts Bay near Penzance, where she dropped anchor. The 23rd brought even more storms, which saw Warspite break free of her anchor, and she was carried across the bay, where she ran aground in Prussia Cove. Her bows were ripped open, the forward compartments flooded, and she sank by her bows. This is where her skeleton crew of 8 men left the battleship. The crew made it off in the treacherous conditions in a lifeboat, with several onlookers looking down from the cliffs above. Soon, more and more onlookers would have a look at the battleship, some of them being her old crew, coming to pay their last respects to the grand old lady. As Warspite clearly wanted to go out on her own terms, as we've seen today, I think she had the right to do. In Warspite, Warships of the Royal Navy, Ian Ballantyne writes, "The Warspite had made her last voyage and typically did what she wanted, refusing to leave her native southwest England, where she was born. She would die. There's no doubt at all those who knew Warspite would have read the reports of her final stubborn gesture with a wry smile, not least Admiral Cunningham and Winston Churchill, 2 leading figures of the 20th century, whom she helped elevate to everlasting fame." It took several more years for Warspite to disappear from her last resting place, cut up and blown apart. In 1950, an attempt to refloat her was buoyed by 24 compressors pumping air into her tanks. This failed as there was an insufficient depth of water to float her clear of the reef. Several more attempts to free Warspite from Prussia Cove ensued, where in the summer of 1950 she was finally towed to Marazion Beach by St. Michael's Mount. In November of that year, another attempt at refloating her was made. The hulk was moved closer to shore. Ballantyne writes, "The job of blasting and cutting her apart continued over the next 7 years. The seaplane crane which recovered Petty Officer Rice's swordfish at Narvik and Matapan was used to lift scrap sections over the side until it too was taken away. The scrap sections were loaded onto the trains at a local siding and transported to Wales to be melted down. In the end, they couldn't remove her oil-burning boilers, which are still deeply embedded in the beach after being blown to bits, thus ending the career of the grand old lady." Veterans of the Warspite Association made annual trips to Cornwall to pay homage to their old ship, in which they commissioned a memorial to be built on the shore at Marazion, something you can visit today if you find yourself in the area. It's a shame that Warspite was not preserved as a museum ship, considering her career and her battle citations. At least in being scrapped, she continued to serve the nation by providing jobs for those breaking her up and melting her down. Again, thank you all so much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, as it'll help the channel to grow. Until next time, my friends, have a great week.